slanting, slogans, hyperbole, and the straw man. These are all pretty straightforward. Slanting is also called the question-begging epithet.
The word has the ambiguity in the sense that you give a denotation, but you give a connotation.
You give a connotation as well, exactly.
By like calling something, up to date, for example, or.
I like the example he gives. He says that there's a lot of examples of slanting in propaganda. Yeah, so I think this is pretty straightforward. Left wing, right wing. There's also euphemism. A long list could be made of slanted adjectives, he says at the end. Each of the following sets of 3 terms means the same thing, but with 3 different connotations. Let's just look at these. I am firm, you are stubborn, he is pig-headed. That's actually from Bertrand Russell.
One is positive, the others are pretty negative.
I'm open-minded, you are flexible, he is a waffler. So it's a scale. And the next one we have righteous indignation versus annoyance versus whining. I am righteously indignant, you are annoyed, he is whining. I'm a public service, you are a government official, he is a bureaucrat. And, bureaucrat by itself is fine, it's just that it has a pejorative connotation.
Exactly.
So. The reader is invited to add many more examples. Lies, damn lies, statistics. This is a very good passage from David Hume. It actually is at the end of the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. He says, if we take into our hand any volume or divinity of school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. Now, Creve does say that it's possible he's exaggerating here for rhetorical effect. But if we take what he is saying,
it itself is not empirical. The statement.
It itself is not an empirical statement. So
circular reasoning.
He's committed a serious error there. That's a famous statement of his, anyway. Slogans, that's 1E. There's a lot of those.
When you use them instead of the argument, I'm anti-abortion because I'm pro-life, for example.
Well, Bush, you're either with us or you're against us. One which I hear a lot which I've heard a lot in my life, if you try and actually make an argument with someone who is not very sophisticated, or you're trying to persuade them on some sort of logical grounds, and perhaps the opinion which you are upholding, or the view which you are arguing for, is not liked by that person, or is considered by the generality of people, by the masses, to be wrong, or well, naturally it will be unpopular, then they'll say something like, be part of the solution, not the problem. You want to be part. What we all need to do is be part of the solution, not the problem. So that's another slogan which I've at least come across a lot. Hyperbole simply means exaggeration. It's a word of Greek origin meaning exaggeration. We see a lot of that in the media.
No, exactly.
So-called media hype. Hype, again, comes from hyperbole.
Exactly.
That's what hype means. We've seen a lot of this. We see this almost on a daily basis. So in recent times, right, there's supposed to be a crisis. All of these people from Mexico and South America and Latin America are beating down the walls to come here, and this is a crisis, and they're all drug dealers and rapists, according to Trump.
The word terrorism itself
terrorism
is used in this hyperbole sense oftentimes.
Right. Straw man is pretty well understood also. It's when in an argument someone represents the views of their opponents, or actually misrepresents them through oversimplification or something along those lines.
I like the point that he mentioned within there, that in medieval debate you would give the argument of your opponent to the satisfaction of the opponent before refuting it.
Yeah, if it's a formal debate.
That's very nice.
Or if you're writing and you have their writings, it's best just to quote verbatim.
And that's what a lot of these people like
Ibn Rushd did. Yeah, exactly. In fact, if you own Tahafut at Tahafut, You've got the whole of Tahafut al-Falasifa probably quoted in there. He was very careful. A very strict and loyal Aristotelian. Ibn Rushd. So now we've got the fallacies of diversion. They all have the Latin word argumentum before them, which just means an argument. So it's argumentum ad something.
What does ad mean in Latin?
Ad means to. So if you're doing your argument correctly, they call it argumentum ad rem. Ad rem. An argument to the point. But if it's argumentum ad hominem, it's arguing to the person, at the person, so to speak, or argumentum, arguing on the basis of misery, or arguing on the basis of sympathy, arguing on the basis of ignorance, arguing on with the threat of force. And they all have a Latin phrase.
Name form.
So let's do these 7, and then I think we'll conclude that. So we have argumentum ad hominem is the most famous one. So the proper argument is argumentum ad rem, argument to the point, or argument addressed to the real thing. So fallacies of diversion, because now we're on a new class, a new category. They turn our attention away from the facts. So they are really an attempt to direct you toward that which is irrelevant, has nothing to do with what's actually being discussed or debated. So we have argumentum ad hominem, or simply ad hominem. They often call them ad hominem arguments in English, which means an argument addressed to the person or the personality instead of to the issue. In other words, a personal attack, attacking the person instead of attacking the issue. How can you believe anything he says?
Exactly. Character assassination and all that.
This is called poisoning the well. In other words, it is a direct attack on the trustworthiness of the person making the statement. Now, you might have valid grounds not to trust a person, but that can't be the argument.
It can't replace reason.
Replace the reason, So, different forms of argumentum. One is called tu quoque, Latin, literally meaning you too. Consists of accusing your critic of the same thing your critic accuses you of, rather than defending yourself against the criticism. Then there's the genetic fallacy. Blah, blah, blah. So let's look at the examples. Here's an example of tu quoque. We have a dialogue. Judge, you have been convicted of petty larceny. Prisoner, Your Honor, I just looked up your salary. You get $200,000 a year. If I'm a thief, you're a bigger one. Okay. Another tu quoque. Saint Augustine led a wild life as a youth, so what right does he have to tell us we should be saints? Okay. Number 3. Your preaching is worthless. Why? Because you don't practice what you preach. Modern version of the above. Papa don't preach. Reganata, some song. Okay. O.J. Simpson was innocent. This was a very famous case. I don't know if you remember this. Was innocent because Mark Furman, the cop who gathered the evidence, was proved to be a racist, which means that we cannot believe his claim that the DNA evidence proves O.J.'s guilt. Irrespective of the case, again, that's an ad hominem fallacy, material fallacy. How could you possibly counsel married couples? You've never been married yourself. What do you know? You're only here. Blah blah blah. Anyway, I don't really think these examples are very good, but ad hominem is pretty
very
clear,
common.
very common. Then there's something called ad verecundium, the appeal to reverence. In other words, reverence for what? Reverence for authority.
That is something, unfortunately, too much.
We have a lot of that in our community.
I know.
Aga so-and-so ne kaha hai. He said this. You know, Ayatollah so-and-so said that. Or some ancient authority, you know. Sheikh Fulan gave this fatwa, or so-and-so said this in such and such book, which was written, you know, in the 8th century of the Hijri. And there's a lot of that. All right, so that doesn't mean that there is... that reliance on authority itself is irrelevant, but it must be relevant authority. I mean, I don't think, you know, for example, it isn't relevant to rely on an authority on swimming, for example, in discussing biology.
And it also it shouldn't be the only thing that you utilize as well. That's the only
Correct.
argument, you know.
Yeah.
Marja X said this is my only dalil, I don't have any other dalil.
Let's try and come up with some other ones. So these are well known, but when you appeal to authority, even when the authority is legitimate, it doesn't clinch the argument.
That's the point.
So I think it is highly questionable. I'm going to say this. I was watching this thing recently. I was watching a video of a debate, an actual debate, in which the famous Christian Protestant philosopher William Lane Craig was defending the contention that there is sufficient historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And he was debating someone named Bart Ehrman, who's no longer a Christian, who also came from a Protestant background, he's a biblical scholar, but he decided that he didn't believe in these things on the basis of his extensive studies. And he's written many books on the authenticity or lack thereof of the many Christian canonical texts in Greek. So William Lane Craig would often and again, he maybe only had 20 minutes to make his point. He'd say, well, such and such great, German theologian or historian is of the view that these documents date to, he's just quoting these people but not presenting the evidence. I'm sure that those people are authorities in their field, but that's not enough. That's not enough. They can make mistakes. But again, that is a whole very, very complex area because it involves knowledge of those texts, how many people in that audience would have had that, and then
does the audience actually respect the authority of those individuals?
I'm sure the people that his constituency certainly did.
But does the other
unquestioningly? And this is a whole area of historical fallacies again. You have to really look at how do you ask that historical question? Is that something that can even be settled? Because in the end, what documents do you have? You have these four Gospels, and people like Kreeft. I won't be so simplistic to say that they unquestioningly accept the authority of these texts, but I don't think they have good evidence. I mean, the biggest argument is that Jesus didn't speak Greek. Yet the whole account and then the statements of Jesus himself that are in these four Gospels are in Greek, a language which he did not know. Anyhow. But there you will find lots of appeals to authority.
Okay.
And appeal to authority need not be a person. It can be appeal to a venerated text held to be sacred, like the Quran, or any other text from any other religion. I don't know, the Vedas, or the some Buddhist sutras, or Zoroastrian religious texts, or the Book of Mormon, for that matter, right? So that by itself, presumably, if you're talking to a Muslim is talking to a Muslim, then the appeal to authority, if the Quran is resorted to, it's fine. Or if it's a Mormon talking to a Mormon, but if it's a Mormon talking to a Muslim and he says, well, this argument is settled because it says this, that, and the other thing, it says such and such in the Book of Mormon, that's not going to work, is it? Anyhow, does he give some other examples? Oh, he does. I didn't see this. Number one, the doctrine of Aristotle is supreme truth because his intellect was the limit. Oh, this is from Ibn Rushd. It is therefore rightly said that he was created and given to us by divine providence. That's Ibn Rushd for sure, yeah. Quoted by Etienne Gilson. There must be something to astrology. My mother swears by it. Okay.
Towards reverence.
Okay, well, would it be a good argument if we said there must be something to astrology? Abu Ma'ashar al-Balkhi says so. Because he's an authority on astrology.
It would be an argument, but it wouldn't be sufficient.
It wouldn't be sufficient.
On its
exactly.
own.
We'd have to look at what Abu Ma'ashar al-Balkhi says. Ho Chi Minh was not a tyrant. How do you know that? Jane Fonda said so. Okay, what does she know, I suppose, as an actress about
so it's not
modern history of Vietnam? According to 75% of all convicted felons, the American justice system is unjust.
Of course, they're convicted felons, you know, bias, all that.
Euclid said that the square on the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal in area to the sum of the squares. Yeah. Well, there, I think we probably have to not only believe Euclid, but Euclid gives a demonstration of this in his Elements. And it is, in fact, an apodictic proof. So you're stuck. It must be true. I got it right from my philosophy professor. That's clear enough. Yeah, these are all pretty obvious. Okay. Ad baculum. Baculum is a stick, a staff. You know, if you study this Latin from the textbook Lingua Latina, then there's a nice little story in there when one of these guys who steals money from his master, he looks for the stick and he beats him with it.
Is there any good book you've come across on Latin roots and whatnot, which summarizes these things? Just not enough to be an expert in the language, but
you just look up a word in
of course
the OED, and it'll tell you whether it's Latin or not.
Very true.
But I'm not really of the view that you should sit and memorize these little Latin roots and Greek roots. If you're serious, go and just study Latin for a semester by yourself. Get the book Lingua Latina and just work through it. And then you will know. Okay. Ad baculum. So it means stick. In other words, it's the appeal to force or the appeal to fear.
We had much in Islamic history.
We've had a lot of that, exactly. All right, I think that's clear enough. Ad misericordiam. The fallacy of ad misericordiam, when appeal to pity, is the perversion of something that is perfectly legitimate in itself. Just as is the appeal to authority. Pity is usually a good thing, but often appropriate, sometimes necessary, but it cannot be a substitute for argument. And he's a professor as well, so there's so many cases of students saying that they should have another chance at their exam because their aunt died. And
Pity.
the number of deaths that take place during a final exam week is truly astounding. And it seems
I am
the
sure
angel of
you
death
have
is working overtime whenever there is an examination.
I'm sure you have many
University.
stories of this.
So many. Or car accidents. This was the thing in the American University in Cairo because it was far away. Now it's far away from the city center.
What would you do in those situations?
People have to commute. What are you going to do? You know, and now with smartphones, they say, la wallahi ustad, I was in an accident. Oh, I said, really? And here's a picture. Do you know how many pictures of smashed up cars there are? You know, as though I don't know this, but what am I going to do?
Somebody brings a fake note or whatever, there's nothing you can do.
That happens a lot in Egypt as well. You think it's hard to get a doctor to sign it? No. Not at all. So we would have those, and I usually would just give them a makeup exam, which would be
Even harder.
Even harder, and anyhow. Ad agnominium. This is the appeal to shame. Yeah, you believe in God? What a, you should, there is a kind of shaming to that. Oh, you're religious? You're moral? Or what have you. I mean, there are different ways, there are different appeals to shame. Like here's one. Oh, you want to be a lawyer? People are going to make jokes about you. Yeah. Ad populum.
This is going against the majority.
Yeah, going against the people.
Nobody believes in the
Yeah. It's also kind of like, a peer pressure, I suppose. Oh, nobody does that.
No.
Nobody thinks like that. Nobody believes that. He likes Shakespeare. He's got another quote from there. This is a nice one from Adolf Hitler. Mein Kampf. The big lie. Quote, the magnitude of a lie always contains a certain factor of credibility, since the great mass of the people, in view of the primitive simplicity of their minds, more easily fall a victim to a big lie than a little one, since they themselves lie in little things but would be ashamed of lies that were too big. Such a falsehood will never enter their heads. The big lie appeals to this process of unconscious reasoning, according to Kreeft. In other words, if most of my kind of people, quote unquote, believe an idea that seems absurd, the idea must be true. For people like me would never fall for that big lie. Ad ignorantium is appeal to ignorance. It's the last one. Arguing that an idea must be true because we do not know that it is not. he can't prove that he earned the money, so he must have stolen it. You know, the Sultan fell over with poison when they were both sitting at the table, so he must have poisoned him. Well, how's he going to prove that he didn't? Nobody is there, you know.
No.
I don't believe in the island of Jabal Qa and Jabal Sa. I've never seen them.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, all of history is in the ghaib to us.
All the history is in the day, but you know, there's the famous case of Ibn Battuta, the traveler. A lot of the things which he wrote about what he saw in, say, India or China when he returned to his home, which would be in present-day Morocco. Apparently, some people didn't believe him. That's why when in certain books on usul al-fiqh, when they talk about testimony, they say that, you know, we rely on testimony for the events in the past and also for accounts of far-off lands, al-buldanu na'iya. And they often would give the example, mithl as-Sin, because how many people would go to China? So, you know, if you come back and say, you know, in China they have a form of money which is paper money. They say, oh, come on, that's nonsense. We don't do that. I've never seen anything like that. Why should we believe
Essentially,
it?
it's tawatur. If, you know, multiple people come back saying the same thing.
It's not tawatur. It's khabar wahid right now. It's a solitary report because only Ibn Battuta is saying it. And then if you want to make tawatur, here's the problem. When do you get tawatur?
There's no real definition.
And approaches infinity, is that tawatur? Do you need 100 people? Do you need 20? Do you need 5?
To this day, I've not found a solid definition for
There isn't.
I think what it comes down to is what gives the researcher itminan. But that itself is problematic.
That's very
Itminan
problematic.
to you might be very different from itminan to me. Maybe I'm easily convinced, or somebody's not.
Again, this now comes down to the actual exercise of logic in coming to conclusions about questions which are open-ended. So, I have often been puzzled by this book, Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais al-Hilal. And there are lots of reports there. And on the face of it, because we're not like the Sunni Muslims where we only go by the isnad, a lot of what is said there makes sense.
It's accurate in the, like a lot of the historical facts within the matan.
I'm not even going there. I'm talking. There's a famous discussion there on the authenticity of hadith, in which Imam Ali talks about the different kinds of reports that people have, and portions of that are quoted in other texts. It's quoted in Al-Kafi. It's quoted even in Abu Hayyan